They have an open house when it's not running, of course. And you can come in and see what's going on. It's not like the other observatories that are paid for with tax dollars, like the laser interferometer gravitational wave observatories. You can go to those, and they'll show you everything, and you can photograph anything you want because it's paid for with taxpayer dollars, and it really is an observatory. But HAARP is a different story. HAARP is definitely has the capability and is being used as a weapons system.
What do you think would happen if we told people like Ron Paul, they've got to be aware of this, would they run with this?
It's hard to say. You know, there is a level of government that appears to be higher than, or at least superior to what our elected officials can access. I spend a fair amount of time in Washington, as you may already guess, with the electric car business. It is, the haves and the have-nots, as you talk about in your commercials. We have the major car makers who build cars, and they're powered by gasoline. The independent car makers that make electric vehicles have a much harder road to hoe. But we have an advantage, and that is that there are hundreds of thousands of customers that want our vehicles. That being said, we do get into political hot water in Washington as we lobby our case and try to get grant money and loan guarantees and different regulations set so that they're more friendly to electric vehicles instead of putting us in the internal combustion engine basket with everyone else. That being said as well, we see the ineffectiveness of congressmen at going over to departments and agencies which are run by the administration, the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation. Congress is individually powerless in these areas. Now, when they get together as a group, they can do things if they happen to read the bill, but most of the time, they're really not treated with much respect in Washington. Outside of Washington, yes. Inside Washington, it's a completely different story. We see a government that's run by bureaucracies, that's run by agencies and departments, and those are run by secretaries and directors, which are not elected, but appointed.
What could be the biggest problem with HAARP? If something would go wrong, beyond the manipulation, if something were to go wrong, Brooks, what could it be?
Well, besides triggering the propensity of an earthquake to happen when you want it to happen, I would say the worst thing that could happen would be the solar tap that we discussed earlier. This discharge of the ionosphere back down to Earth would be akin to a comet striking in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It could be, cataclysmic. To play with this system is just not responsible. That would be the biggest downside, is that all of a sudden you just have an industrial accident that makes a mild radiation leak into the Pacific Ocean look like a skinned knee.
How many people believe this story about HAARP? What do you think?
Well, of course, I see a lot of mail. Every time there's an earthquake, I get tons of mail. Was HAARP responsible? Was HAARP responsible? And I always have to go out and do some investigation and make some phone calls. And I'm always hesitant to say, yes, HAARP was involved. But I do ask the scientific questions. Were these telltale signs present? Were people watching for this and for this and for this? And when that evidence comes in, the haze in the sky, the ham signatures, the ELF almost audio signals that are picked up, if those occur hours or even days before the quake, I would say HAARP was indirectly or even directly involved in triggering that earthquake. With respect to weather manipulation, we're beginning to see cloud patterns that we have never photographed before. They're almost like washboard skies layered upon each other. And when we begin messing with the balance of ecology, Mother Nature has a way of lashing back at it. And maybe we're seeing some of the backlash with this extreme weather that we're seeing.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Are we better off today with something like HAARP out there or not?
Well, I would say yes, we're better off because we've learned what not to do. Now we just need to be wise enough to stop doing it.
Well, but are we?
That's hard to say. I can tell you that lots of money is being poured into it. It's definitely being upgraded. The facilities are being modernized every single year. And we're not talking small budgets here. We're talking multi-$100 million budgets.
Well, and they're always in denial. So are we going to get anybody to come forward besides the experts like you and Nick Begich and admit what the heck this thing is?
Some of the congressmen and women have begun to ask the questions. Sheila Jackson Lee, not the least of which, put the question to Donald Rumsfeld, what about this? Where is this money going? And Donald Rumsfeld, although not a long history at the Pentagon, was pretty open. And he said, we can't find the money. And we're not talking a small amount of money, George. We're talking a couple of $1 trillion.
I know. It's sickening, isn't it?
It really is. We really did well as a nation the last 10 years. We have been very productive, very innovative. Technology is doubling at an astonishing rate. And the economy is, strangely enough, is fairly resilient, even though unemployment is high and inflation seems to be creeping along behind it. What is really frustrating to those of us that are trying to gain access to capital is that we see multiple trillions of dollars being funneled to the biggest corporations in the world who already have all the money, and it's not as though they're making interest on it. Some of this money, $3.3 trillion, went out at almost 0% interest. And companies like General Motors and GE and Disney and some of these companies didn't even need the money. And when you follow the money, you see, wait a minute, General Electric ended up with several $100 million in low-interest loans, and the next month the CEO of GE is made the head of economic recovery by President Obama. What's going on here? Isn't anyone else connecting the dots here? What frustrates us is this money is being pulled out of our economy, which we put there. We deserve to use it to stimulate our own economy and create those jobs by allowing small business to have access to that money to help offset the risk of starting up new businesses, because obviously we've lost a lot of our core businesses to exports and outsourcing. It's time to start building stuff again in this country.
If you had access to HARP and somebody was out there, what would you ask them? What's the thing you want to know about this thing?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would want to see the records of when it was used, where it was targeted, because it's not accidental, and I would begin lining up those events with the natural events that have happened in those areas. And if they line up, it's time to shut it down.
Brooks, we're going to come back and take phone calls with you about the journey to the center of the earth and also HARP on Coast to Coast AM.